So, what are some possible methods or ways in which biases can occur in a public opinion poll if one were to be implemented? Well, there are a few ways that biased selections or bias samples can skew results. The first is self selection. If you are not careful about randomly choosing people to participate in a survey and getting a good number of random responses, then what can happen is there might be a certain characteristic in people that makes them more likely to respond to your survey or to your public opinion poll. Perhaps they're more politically enthusiastic. Perhaps they are more opinionated. Both of these things could perhaps skew your results if you're trying to get a snapshot of the entire population, because the entire population is not equally politically enthusiastic. They are not equally participatory. And so if you have a bunch of people in your sample that self-selected through a bias mechanism, it can skew your results and make your results non-representative. The way in which you contact people can also skew your results. In the age of cell phones, internet, smartphones, and a paucity of landlines, if you use old methods such as random digit dialing landlines, home phones, then you get, again, a rather skewed population, particularly when it comes to age. Time of day can also feature into this. If you are calling people on landlines in the middle of a weekday, chances are most of the people who are even around to answer the phone are older, retired, perhaps, and are not necessarily representative of how the population as a whole is communicating. And so that can also bias your results. You also have what's called non-response bias. And this is when people are making a decision, conscious decision, to not participate in a poll survey. Not that they're just too lazy to answer the phone or to respond to a questionnaire, but they're making a conscious choice not to respond. Now, how might this happen? Well, let's say one of the presidential candidates has just made some sort of verbal gaffe in the media, and it's caused a lot of embarrassment. And so, a public polling firm decides to try and gauge whether or not that person's support has gone up or down. Well, people who are prone to support that candidate might simply not want to respond to any questionnaire with regard to presidential support. They may still plan on voting for that person, but they don't necessarily want to admit to it to an in-person interviewer or caller for the purposes of a public opinion poll. And so it may appear that that candidate's support has gone down, when in fact his most ardent supporters have simply chosen not to respond. And then finally, the internet can have its own issues. If you're not careful about the way in which you use internet sampling, you might get a particular subset of internet users who are of one political party, who are of one ideology, for example. I spoke to you about the possible ways in which media can be biased, for example. So if you post a link to a survey through a media website, and this media site is known for its conservative leanings, then you might get nothing but conservatives in your sample. And though conservatives are a good chunk of the American population, they don't represent the entirety of the American population. And so you might get skewed results that way as well if you post to a website that has more conservative traffic. You can also end up biasing your results through the questioning itself. Sometimes these are called push polls, where they literally try to push respondents into answering one way or the other. So for example, one famous instance of this was during the 2008 election, during the primaries, actually, in South Carolina, in which one question read, would you be more or less likely to vote for John McCain for president if you knew he had fathered an illegitimate Black child? And so this is obviously priming the respondent to think about things in a certain way. The phrase illegitimate Black child has no bearing in reality in terms of John McCain's actual personal history, but it's asking, would it affect you if you knew he had? And so it's trying to push the response into giving the respondent into giving a certain answer. There are several ways that you can word questions in this way. So wording, priming, and framing. Now you may recall I used similar terms in the media module, but I'm going to use these in different ways. They're the same terms, but you need to be mindful of when I'm using them with reference to the media and when I'm using them with reference to polling. Now there's some overlap in their definitions here, but be mindful of when the differences become relevant.